Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our training session today. Our session is covering the sign-on and setup of agents and administrators, and really the overall administration as it comes to the new PNM system. And you'll hear me use that acronym quite a bit throughout our training session. PNM is Provider Network Management. That is the new system that is being introduced to house information regarding Ohio Medicaid and the Medicaid enrolled providers. It's this new system that is created eventually with the ultimate goal of replacing the MITS portal that is currently in use by the Ohio Department of Medicaid. My name is John Wolf, and I am a training manager with Maximus. And Maximus is the company that has been tasked with creating this provider network management system. So that is going to be on the focus of our training session here today. Really, provider network management system, how we sign into it, and once we're in the system, how to get some of the overall navigation and locations and places we need to go to create or to complete tasks and among other things in the PNM system. So thank you so much for joining us for this training session. We are scheduled for an hour and a half today. It may not take that entire time, but we do want to make the most of our session. So we'll talk about throughout our session, if you do have questions or concerns or anything like that, how we can kind of communicate throughout our training session today. We are making use of the Zoom webinar platform. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, I'm going to take some time to kind of go through some of the different functionalities in Zoom to make sure that you have a good understanding as we go through our session here today. If you're using Zoom for the first time, Zoom is kind of initiated through a taskbar which appears at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to kind of walk through many of those different options in the bottom of the toolbar to kind of understand what each of them do. So that toolbar, again, kind of the bottom of the screen, and working left to right, we're going to first look at the audio settings. So throughout our session today, if you do have any issues with your audio or anything like that, you can update them or make changes under the audio settings section. So if you are having difficulty hearing, if you can see maybe the words that appear on the screen but you can't hear me, you can open up this audio settings by clicking on the arrow icon located next to the audio settings. And that'll give you several different options when it comes to audio functionalities, whether that's changing your output for your speakers, whether you've got computer speakers or headphones, you can select a different output through there, or you also may be able to test your speaker and microphone. That's kind of a quick way to make sure you've got the right inputs and outputs, the right speaker setting, or if you do want to ask a question verbally and speak, make sure that the right microphone setting has been chosen. You can do that. Another kind of quick way to overcome any audio issues that you are having, Zoom does allow us to switch to phone audio. So you can still join the session and view the session on the screen, but if your computer or headphones or whatever you're using aren't allowing you to hear sound, it does have the ability to switch to phone audio. And when you select that, it'll give you the option either to call in a number or have a number call you. You would provide your phone number there, and you can get the audio through the phone. You can hear me through the phone, but you can still use your computer screen for the visuals, and at least it won't be on kind of that smaller phone. It'll still be on that large screen. So that could be an option if you're experiencing any audio issues there. But really, the audio settings is kind of the first place to start if throughout our session today you experience any interruptions or changes in the audio that you're hearing in our session. We also have the chat functionality as well. Throughout our session today, chat's mainly going to be used for those kinds of things like technical issues. You can't see a screen, or you can't hear something, or want me to go slower, things like that. You can kind of put in the chat and I can follow along with that. We ask that you don't put questions in the chat. We've got another panel for that. And the reason being is often in chat, if there is a lot of conversation, the question may appear and then get kind of shuffled out of order. So to understand what answer is kind of linked with that question, it can become a little bit difficult to do that. So mainly the chat, just kind of we'll use for any comments or technical issues or things like that during our session today. Located next to chat, we do want to take your questions throughout the session, and one way we can do that is through the raise hand functionality. If you click raise hand, it will have you raise your hand. I'll be able to see that in the participants panel, and then you can I'll call on you, ask you, request that you unmute your microphone, and then you're able to ask your question verbally if you would prefer in our session today. When you do raise your hand, the button changes and says lower hand instead, so that's kind of a way to know that your hand is actively raised. And then upon asking your question and me addressing it, you can lower your hand, or I'm able to lower your hand as well. Next to the raise hand feature is the Q&A panel. Now, this will be our primary place that we're going to utilize our questions throughout the session today. So the Q&A panel, once you click on that button, it opens up the panel and you're able to type in your question. You do have the ability to send that question anonymously if you want to check that box. If you don't want to have your name associated with it, that's okay. But you can type in your question and then hit the send button. And then within that panel, I'll be able to see the question that you have and address it kind of in that same panel. So in this example here on the screen, we had a question. I'm able to address it in writing, and that way they're kind of linked together. The question and answer stay together, and that's the benefit of this Q&A panel, to keep those together. You also have an opportunity up at the top of the page where you can kind of sort between all the questions that are asked by all the attendees that we have in this session, or if you just want to be able to view the questions that you may ask in the panel and the answers related to those, you can kind of switch between those two tabs at the top of the Q&A panel once questions start appearing in that panel. You may not see that option yet, but once that happens, you should have the opportunity to move between. So if you do have questions throughout the session, you can put them in that Q&A panel. That's something that I'm monitoring throughout our session today and can be able to answer those questions for you. The next icon that you may see in the bottom of the screen is the live transcript, or kind of the CC icon for closed captioning. I have turned on the live transcript, so there should be subtitles going with the words that I am saying. If you don't see that and want to enable it, you should be able to click on live transcript and enable the subtitle, or vice versa. If you are seeing it, but you don't want to see that subtitle anymore, you can click on that option, and there's an option to hide the subtitles, so you're not seeing those words constantly appear if you don't want to have that throughout our session today. But that is an availability within there. And then we also have the reactions panel. Now, some of these panels, depending on how your screen is set up, Zoom does sometimes minimize things or combines them under one menu. So if you don't see live transcript or reactions, it could be that it's under a section that says more and has 3 dots kind of as its icon. If you click on more, you should be able to see these additional options. It just may be how your screen is sized, and sometimes Zoom will kind of combine those under one section. But the reactions panel, if you click on that, it opens up a variety of different reactions that you can submit during our training session today. There also may be opportunities where I ask you to give me a thumbs up if you can see this or see that, and when the thumbs up can be found under that reactions panel as well. So that's where you can locate those different items within that Zoom toolbar, again at the bottom of the screen. And then the last kind of icon or button that you can select is the leave button. That's located all the way over on the right hand side, kind of in that red button. And that's upon the conclusion of our training session today. That's the way you can kind of leave the session, by clicking the leave button. That will take you out of our virtual webinar today. And you'll be able to go about your day as well. So that's just a quick overview of the Zoom tools for those of you who may not been able to use those, and that's what we'll use throughout our session today. So let's kind of get into what our session today, our training session, is about. And this is the sign-on and setup of agents. Overall administration, which includes the role of administrator. We're going to talk more about that today, but really designed to deliver that detailed process for signing on and setting up your account within the P&M system. We'll also talk about some other terms later on, or other roles that are in P&M, known as agents or administrators, what the differences are. And how those are set up in P&M we'll also talk about. But really, these 6 topics that you see on the screen are what we're going to hope to cover in our session today. And the first one is pre-registration. Now, you may have heard that term already, but basically what pre-registration is, it is linking existing provider records, so existing NPIs, Medicaid IDs, to an Ohio ID account. And we'll talk more about what that is. But if you're unfamiliar with an Ohio ID account, that is going to be the login process for accessing P&M. It's going to be through Ohio ID. So that's what pre-registration is. I know some of you on the call may already have an Ohio ID account. And if that's the account you have been using in the past months and everything to access your provider information, then you may not have to complete the pre-registration process, since that link already exists between Ohio ID account and the information, the Medicaid ID, and so forth. Our technical team has said that, if you do already have that Ohio ID account and that's what you've been using to access provider information or the provider file, then you don't necessarily have to complete registration. Now, we are going to go through the steps. There's no harm in doing the pre-registration process. Even if that's the case, it's just kind of a backup or a fail-safe, making sure that link is truly existing on there. But just wanted to pass along that information. Once we kind of get those all connected and make sure that our Ohio ID account is attached to our existing provider information, then we'll talk about logging in to P&M, what that process looks like with our Ohio ID account, how we'll log into P&M. And then we're going to go over the main page, the landing page when you log into P&M. It's referred to as your home page or your dashboard. We're going to discuss that, as well as just kind of general navigation. How do we move around P&M and initiate different processes? We'll talk about that in depth. And then the last 2 points on our agenda today, we are going to talk about kind of those 2 different roles that I had mentioned, an administrator and an agent. Those are 2 roles that users can hold within the P&M system. We'll talk about the differences, how to get those set up in the P&M system. So that's our focus for today, sign on and setup. Again, P&M is the Provider Network Management System. This system is set to launch on October 1st of this year. So now down to less than a month to go until this system does launch in a matter of weeks. But that is the new system that with the ultimate goal of replacing the current MITS portal that's in use by the Ohio Department of Medicaid today. So let's get into our first topic on our agenda, which is pre-registration. And before we go through the ins and outs of pre-registration, I do want to define a couple of terms for you here on the screen as we get started. And the first one is that Ohio ID, or you may pronounce it or say it just as the letters OHID. I've heard it that way as well. An Ohio ID is a personal individual user account that's created through the Innovate Ohio platform. And that's our second bullet point on the screen, is the Innovate Ohio platform, or IOP. That platform was set up. It was a kind of a main point for Governor DeWine after he was elected, to kind of have this single login for a variety of state systems, state agency systems, and the lieutenant governor has been working on that as well. And that's what the Innovate Ohio platform is. We have one login, which is our Ohio ID, and we can access a variety of state agency systems all from one place. And now this will include the Provider Network Management, or P&M system. So this Ohio ID login is not just for P&M, it's for a variety of systems, and P&M just happens to be part of that list of different systems as well. So you'll need an Ohio ID to log into P&M if you don't already have one. Then we kind of take a look at our bottom bullet points here. Here are kind of those 2 roles we mentioned within the P&M system. We have the administrator role and the agent role. So starting first with the administrator role, that's a role assigned to a user in P&M who's really kind of the main person in control, the one that's going to have the most accesses to the provider's information, the ability to complete whatever needs to be done for the provider record is the administrator. The administrator also has the ability to create new enrollment applications, newly enrolling providers in Medicaid, as well as updating provider records, completing revalidations, and also setting up other users, which are known as agents, and we'll talk about in a second, but setting up those other users for accesses and the ability to complete functions within the P&M system. Do want to call out this sub bullet point here. It says there is one administrator role per NPI or Medicaid ID. So that is how it is set up in P&M, that one user for a provider, for a Medicaid ID or NPI, there can only be one administrator. We can't have multiple administrators for a single Medicaid ID number. However, that second point in that sentence is important to know. It says, however, a single user with the administrator role can administer to multiple providers. So I can be a single user in P&M, and I could be an administrator for provider 1, provider 2, provider 3, provider 4. I could be that user, that administrator for multiple providers. Now, these terms that we're talking about, administrator and agent, may not necessarily apply to you if you're an individual or independent provider and you kind of do everything on your own. Nobody is, completing any tasks or anything on your behalf. Then you'd be your own administrator, and you probably wouldn't have any agents or other roles set up for your account. But there are situations where that does occur. Somebody's kind of the overseeing person. Other people are completing things, and that's where we kind of get this administrator and agent relationship. And that is the final term we want to define here is agent. So that's another role within the P&M system that's assigned to a user and allows them to complete specific actions within P&M. And what we mean by specific action is the administrator is the one that controls what actions that agent user can complete in P&M. So potentially the administrator could say, you can complete updates, changes of address, for a provider, and maybe you're also the one who completes revalidations, or you're the one who is going to submit claims on behalf of this provider. Specific actions are set up, and those specific actions are given to an agent by an administrator. We're going to walk through that process a little bit later on in our session today. So just wanted to be able to define these terms before we start using them throughout our training session today, so you have a good understanding when we refer to them, what we're talking about and what's covered there. So let's get into our kind of first section, as we said, is pre-registration. So this basically is the process. Pre-registration is linking existing provider records or existing providers who are enrolled in Medicaid. We're linking those accounts to an Ohio ID. Now, again, some of you may have a situation where this has already been done. You've been using an Ohio ID to access your information, and that's great. There are some that use a different login just to get into the MIT system, which is not an Ohio ID account, and that's kind of where those changes come from. So all pre-registration is we are linking that Ohio ID account to the information of the provider. Now, when the system of P&M does launch October 1st, a couple of weeks before that here in late September, there is going to be a data conversion. All the existing data in the MITS portal will be converted over to P&M. So while the data for the providers will come over, really the disconnect is the logging in to the system and making sure the user who logs in can access that information. And that's the whole point of this pre-registration process. All pre-registration it's a website that has been set up, and it is live now. It's been going on for a few weeks, but September 23rd is the cutoff, kind of the last time that pre-registration can happen. So basically all of that data that's been collected during pre-registration can be put in the new P&M system and make sure that those linkages are up to date. So until September 23rd, pre-registration is available, and let's see kind of what that looks like. And let me drop it in the chat. Actually, there is a website for pre-registration, and I'll drop that in the chat. So you can just access that website, and basically you're completing that link between the existing provider information, the NPI, Medicaid ID, to this Ohio ID account if there's not already a linkage together. So once you go into that website for pre-registration, this is what that landing page or welcome page looks like. The screenshot we have here on the top of the page that says welcome to provider user pre-registration. And all you have to do to get started is click the button that says get started. And then it's going to prompt you and ask you two questions. The first one is, are you a current or previous Medicaid provider with the Ohio Department of Medicaid, or are you completing things on behalf of a provider? Kind of applies in the same situation, and you're going to answer that yes or no. And then the second question is, do you have an Ohio ID account? And that's a yes or no question as well. So based on those questions and your answers, you would answer the questions either yes or no, and then click the next step button to move on. So for the purposes of our training right now, let's say we answered yes to both those questions. We're a current or previous Medicaid provider with the Ohio Department of Medicaid, or we complete things on behalf of a provider, and we have an existing Ohio ID account. So I'm going to answer yes to both of those questions and then click on the button that says next step. And it tells us here the next step is to sign in with our Ohio ID account. Since we said that we have one, we need to sign in with our Ohio ID account. And that's what this button is going to redirect us to do, to go to our Ohio ID sign-in page. So I'm going to click on that. And it'll take us right to the Ohio ID sign-in page. So if you've used this account before, this probably looks familiar to you. But if you have that existing account, you do want to enter your credentials, your Ohio ID username and Ohio ID password to access that account. Once that information has been entered, you can click the log in button. So once you're logged in, you're going to get redirected back to that pre-registration site now that you successfully logged in to the Ohio ID account through IOP, the Innovate Ohio platform. And then you're going to be asked another question. It's asking, what type of user account do you have or need? Now, I know the website of pre-registration has been updated since I grabbed this screenshot. I think it now says provider/provider administrator, just informing that if you're kind of doing everything on your own, nobody's doing it on your behalf, you would basically be your own administrator. Just to kind of clear up that confusion. But really, we need to make that determination. Are we the administrator? Are we kind of the one in charge, overseeing the account? I'm gonna, set up other users or people to potentially use the account. Who's going to control that? Now, if I'm not an administrator, if I'm an agent, I can select agent here, and it's really going to end the process. There's nothing more I need to do as an agent when we defined that term earlier at this juncture. Really, all I need to make sure I have as an agent is make sure I have an Ohio ID account prior to October 1st when P&M launches. And then after that time, the administrator will be able to go into P&M and kind of set me up as an agent. And we'll walk through that process today. But if I'm an administrator or I'm an independent provider, I basically serve as my own administrator. That's what I would want to select here on the screen as a provider administrator. And then I'll go ahead and click on next step. Then it's going to bring up some information, or it's going to ask me for some information in regards to linking these accounts. Again, the whole purpose of pre-registration is to link existing provider records and existing NPI, Medicaid ID. We're linking that to the Ohio ID account of the user who will serve as the administrator. That's the information that we're entering here. So on the left-hand side, we need at least 2 of the 3 pieces of this information: a Medicaid ID, a tax ID, and an NPI. We need at least 2 of those 3 pieces of information to type in that highlighted box there. Underneath that, you don't have to put anything in for email address or Ohio ID, as those will kind of automatically come over based on your login information of how you logged in to the Ohio ID. So nothing has to be added there. But once you've got the information for the provider that you're trying to associate to your Ohio ID account, you can come down here to the bottom of the screen and click the button that says Add New. Once you click Add New, information should populate over here on the right-hand side of the page. Now, I know I don't have a screenshot showing that, but basically what would happen is the information you entered here on the left and hit Add New, that provider information should show up here on the right. So there's a spot for Medicaid ID and provider name. There should be a listing there of a Medicaid ID and a provider name based on what you entered over here on the left-hand side of the page. Now, if there's just one account that you need to associate, or just one provider, Medicaid ID, that you need to associate, that's it. You've kind of completed your process, and you can move on. But if there's multiple that you are the administrator for, or that you will kind of be that main person for, you'll want to repeat the process. So you'll just kind of go through this again, put in a Medicaid ID, tax ID, NPI, hit Add New, and now the second one will appear on the right-hand side. Repeat it again, the third one will appear on the right section over here, and so forth. So go through, everyone that you are the administrator for, that you're going to be kind of that person that oversees the information. And then once you have completed that process, that's when we can look down here at this next button that says Save and Finish. So once all of our associations have been linked to our Ohio ID account, that's basically what we're doing here. Again, for the person serving as the administrator, if you're going to serve in an agent role, you would not have to complete this. And then you would hit Save and Finish once all those providers have been entered. After we hit save and finish, we get this confirmation message that we're seeing here on the screen, letting us know that kind of a summary of what just occurred. Ohio ID account has been pre-registered and linked to the new provider management system. And then kind of down here in the results, it tells us what has been completed. It gives us the Medicaid ID number and the provider name of who has been associated, and also that result or status. In this case, says success, the user linked to a provider as an administrator. I will point out too, this is the only confirmation message that you do receive as part of the pre-registration process. There's no confirmation email that goes out or anything like that. So I know some people who've gone through this process maybe screenshot this or right-click and save it as a PDF, just so they have some sort of tangible confirmation that this process has indeed gone through. So just wanted to call that out, that this is the only confirmation page that you receive. If you get to the end of the process here and you're like, oh no, I missed one, I need to do more, you can click this start again button to start the process over, and it'll kind of take you back to the area where you selected the agent and administrator, and you kind of move forward with there from the associations. Now, if you do go back, the associations that you have successfully done, they may not appear in that kind of right-hand section that we looked at on the previous slide. But as long as you've received this confirmation message, then it has successfully gone through. So that's why I point out that some people have just kind of saved this just to know that if they do go back and the other ones aren't showing up, that has it truly gone through, yes or no? And the answer is yes, as long as this confirmation message shows that success there. So that's the process of kind of completing that linkage and linking existing provider records, existing Medicaid IDs to an Ohio ID account, if that's not the way that you use to access that information today. Do want to point out the other scenario. So if you don't have an Ohio ID account today and you need to get one, you can certainly do that through the pre-registration process. It doesn't have to be. You could just put in your search on your web search for Ohio ID, sign up or log in, and it'll take you to that login section. But for the purposes of our training today, let's say we are a current or previous Medicaid provider with the Ohio Department of Medicaid, and we do not have an Ohio ID account. So that's how we're answering those questions, yes and then no, and we'll click on next step. And the system is going to tell us the next step is to create an online account and then get signed in. So we would hit go to new Ohio account, go to Ohio new account page, excuse me. We click on that, and it's going to take us to this screen that we've already become very familiar with. We saw this earlier, but instead of logging in down here at the bottom of the screen, we would click the create account button up here at the top of the page if we did not have an Ohio ID account already. So once we hit create account, then it'll open up kind of the steps of completing that Ohio ID account. We see those 6 steps here in the process on the right, or in the middle of the screen, I should say. 6-step process to complete an Ohio ID account. It may seem like a lot, but it goes pretty quick. You can probably get it done in 5 to 10 minutes to create your Ohio ID account. But we go through email verification, personal information. You pick a username and create a password. You can set up a text message or something else as a backup to recover your account, and then go through terms or agree to the terms and conditions as well. So really a quick process to create that Ohio ID account. It is recommended, as I go back up to this top one, for email verification, it is recommended to use a personal email account for your Ohio ID account. And really that's because, again, this Ohio ID is not specific to the P&M system. It's used for a variety of accounts through different state agencies. So not everything that you may use it for may be, for work or work related in that sense. I know one of the things that you can do with an Ohio ID account is renew your vehicle registration with the BMV, and obviously that's kind of something you would do on a personal level. So it's recommended to use that personal email address because Innovate Ohio platform is used for a variety of different state agencies and their websites, things like that. And also, if something did happen and you didn't have access to that work email address anymore, it's not tied to an address that you can't access if you needed to recover or things like that. So just wanted to point out that recommendation here as we look at these processes. And then once you create your account, you'll be taken back to the pre-registration process where you can go through those links that we looked before, setting up those associations with providers and getting it linked to that Ohio ID account. So with that, I do want to pause here and see what questions that you may have about the pre-registration process. And if so, you can put those in the Q&A panel. Or as we said, if you do want to have that question verbally, you can raise your hand and ask your question as well. I don't see any in the QA panel or any hands raised, so we'll go ahead and continue on with our session. Do want to pull up sort of this visual. I know we talked about the relationship of agents and administrators so far, and sometimes we can see that in words, but really maybe not understand. So it's better to get kind of a visual idea or representation of what that's about. So here's an example on the screen and a situation that may come up. So as we said, there is one administrator per NPI or Medicaid ID, and that's what we're seeing here in orange. This administrator in orange is the loan administrator for provider A, loan administrator for their NPI or Medicaid ID number. Now, underneath that administrator can set up multiple agents for provider A. And each of these agents could complete something different on behalf of that provider. So let's say agents, like I said, 1, 2, and 3, they're all assigned to provider A. Maybe agent 1 handles claims, agent 2 handles prior authorizations, and agent 3 is the one that's completing revalidations for this provider. But as we can see underneath the agent, it doesn't mean just because I'm an agent for provider A, I can't be an agent or complete tasks on behalf of other providers. And we see that here in this yellow section for the provider. So agent 1 is an agent for this provider A, but it's also an agent for provider B. So maybe they complete claims for provider A, provider B, and claims and prior authorizations for provider C. That could be a possibility. Same for agent 2. Maybe they complete the prior authorizations for provider A and then do revalidations for provider D. Whereas agent 3 is only completing those revalidations for provider A. So just wanted to kind of show a structure that while there is only one administrator per NPI or Medicaid ID, that administrator can assign many other users as agents underneath that particular provider. And there's no limit on the number of agents or the tasks or functionalities that they can complete, or as far as how many you can assign. There are a few things that only an administrator is able to do, and those include new enrollment. So new enrolling in Medicaid is only an administrator function, as well as setting up accesses for agents as well. So that's just kind of a visual to let you know that there can be multiple agents under an administrator, and it works the same way for an administrator, as I'm showing here on this screen, that just because I'm the administrator for a single provider, a single NPI or Medicaid ID, I, as that administrator user, I can have multiple providers that I'm the administrator for. And that's what we're showing here on this screen. So I, John Wolf, that's my login. Let's say I'm an administrator. That's my username is John Wolf. I could be the administrator for this individual's providers, Medicaid ID, this individual provider, and then an organization 1 and organization 2. I could be the administrator for all 5 of these providers. Now, each of these providers only has one administrator, that's me, but I can be an administrator for more than one provider. So we do just wanted to kind of call that out. I know in past trainings that we've had, there's been some discussion on the amount of administrators and the amount of agents and what they can do. So I hope that the visual kind of lays that out, that one administrator per NPI or Medicaid ID, but you can have multiple agents for a particular NPI or Medicaid ID, and they can complete several different tasks, and the administrator is the one in charge of those tasks that are completed. So just wanted to be able to kind of clarify that relationship in terms of the administrator and the agent. So let's now move into logging in to PNM. Now, there's going to be a couple ways to log in. I'm going to go through one way, but if you are familiar with the Innovate Ohio platform, if that's what you use often and access different systems through there, you may be familiar with the apps that come up on the IOP. I have been told by the Innovate Ohio platform that come October 1st, there should be an app for PNM that does appear on that list. It's not available now because the system's not live, but you should have the ability to access PNM directly through the IOP, or on this way that we're going to show you of how to just go to a web address or a URL and access PNM. And this is the way I can can show you. I know this way works, so that's why, I pointed out that there's a couple of ways to do it, and I don't really have any screenshots or any steps for the other process just because it doesn't exist as of today. But logging into P&M is a web-based system. And what we mean by that is you're able to access it through the web, just through a web browser. So you can go to the top of your browser and locate the address bar and put in the URL for P&M, which will be provided to you before the system launches in October. Right now it's not live, so the link doesn't take you anywhere. It just kind of gives you error messages. But come October 1st, P&M will be a live system. So you can use that internet browser, whether you're using Google Chrome or Firefox or Microsoft Edge or Safari if you're using a Mac. All of those are accessible to access P&M. So you'd put in that web address at the top of the page and hit enter, and then P&M would display. And that's what we're seeing here on this example. This is P&M, is what the login or landing page looks like. So, just kind of basic information as far as accessing the P&M system is what we're seeing here. And again, that Ohio ID is needed to successfully log in to the P&M system. So we're going to zoom in a little bit more here on this login area and kind of narrow that down. And so if you're ready to log into P&M, the nice thing about having it as a web-based system is that, once you access that URL the first time, you can just set it up as a bookmark in your browser and then access it, every time after that by clicking on the bookmark. But once you do get to the login page, you're going to need to enter your user ID in the space provided. And the user ID, again, is going to be your Ohio ID user ID, or the username for your Ohio ID account. That's what needs to be entered in that space on the login page. Once you enter that, you're going to click the next button, this kind of purple button located right below that. Now the button's going to remain in the same place, but it's going to change the wording from next. Instead, it's going to say go to IOP. What that means is it's recognizing that the username that you put in is an Ohio ID account, and now it wants to redirect you to the Innovate Ohio platform, or IOP, to log in to your Ohio ID account. So that's what it's recognizing there after you hit next. And to move forward in the process, you can click the button that says go to IOP. Before I move forward in that process, I do want to call out this section down here where it says don't have an account. Click here. If, for whatever reason, if you or maybe somebody that you work with, we get to October 1st when the P&M system launches and you don't yet have an Ohio ID account, or they don't, instead of kind of searching around for how to set that up, you can access this link directly through P&M to create that account. So I just wanted to call that out. It is just right here embedded on the page of login for P&M that you can access that link as well. But going back, we put in our Ohio ID username, we hit next, it recognized it was an Ohio ID account, and so now the system wants to redirect us to the IOP. So we're going to click on Go to IOP. And again, this screen probably looks familiar. We've already looked at it a couple times today. This is what we'll log in with our information. So we're going to put in our Ohio ID username and the password that we created, and then we're going to click the Login button. Once we do click login, that's the benefit of being able to initiate the process in P&M. The system is going to know we just need to come here to log in, and then it's going to redirect us back to P&M to kind of complete our processes there. So if we log in through P&M, put in those details of our username, redirected to Innovate Ohio platform, put that information in, now it's going to send us back to the P&M system. And the way that we can confirm that, we get this kind of terms screen. It goes over the terms of use for using P&M. This will pop up every time that you access the P&M system. So unless it calls it out that the terms have changed, they'll remain the same. And to move forward in the process, you can click this button that says, yes, I have read the agreement. I agree to the terms of use for the P&M system. So that's really the process of logging in. I do want to pull up this screen. Many times in training, we like to look at the happy path, assuming everything's going to go well and everything's going to work the way it's supposed to, but we know that doesn't always happen in the real world. So this screen would be a situation where you're trying to log into P&M and you may get this message where it says your account has not yet been activated. And really, this could be a situation where tech support maybe disabled another user's account and maybe they miskeyed something and put in, a number or a letter that ended up being your account. But really just wanted to point this out, that if you ever do get this screen regarding your account not being activated or disabled or anything like that, all you need to do is contact the help desk. And that's the ODM integrated help desk. And I can put that number here in the chat as well. But all you just need to do is contact the help desk, and they'll be able to, see why your account is disabled or not active, and make sure to get that corrected. So let me put the ODM integrated help desk number here in the chat. It may be a situation where you've contacted this number before. It's the same number that they use, that ODM uses today, that 1-800-686-1516. But that would be the help desk number that you could contact in that situation. So we've gone through pre-registration. We understand now how to log in to P&M, accessing that URL or web address, or potentially, once October 1st rolls around, we're able to click on the app in the IOP and go through that way as well. So we can get logged in to P&M. So do you want to pause again just to see what questions you may have about the login process for the provider network management or P&M system. And I don't see any hands up or any questions in the panel, so I will continue into our next topic for our session today, and that is the home page and navigation. So once we've gone through the login process, we've agreed to those terms of use. Where are we at now in P&M? What happens next? And that's what we're going to take a look at now. So once we log into P&M, we're taken to a home page. We often refer to this as your dashboard as well, because it's got a wealth of information on it. So if you hear homepage or dashboard, it's the same page, kind of the page you access once you log in to P&M. And that's the example we're seeing here at the top of the screen. So we can see kind of a wealth of words and buttons to click on and information. And really to kind of narrow that down, this section here towards the bottom of this, and this is kind of a cutoff screenshot, but all of the providers that your Ohio ID is associated to, which is the importance of that pre-registration process. If it's not linked together, all of those providers will appear kind of in this table format. You'll see their names, provider types, NPIs, Medicaid IDs, all of that will appear kind of in this same table format. So if I've only in charge of myself and just one provider, I may look like this, where I just have one. But if I'm the administrator or an agent for multiple, there'll be kind of a whole list in this table of different providers that I have the ability to complete functions for. I do want to direct your attention, though, to the top of the page, kind of this dark blue bar or banner across the top. This banner or toolbar will appear in P&M regardless of what page that you're on in the system. And what I mean by that is, if I've going through different processes and I've moved way away from where we're at now, I can always get back here to my home page, because this ribbon is always going to appear at the top of the page regardless of what page I'm on. So just kind of want to walk through some of the options that are available in this ribbon or toolbar across the top to make sure that we have a good understanding of those. And working left to right, the first one is kind of this home icon. And what that will do will bring you back home to your home page or your dashboard, and that's the page that we're looking at right now. So I mentioned, maybe situations where you get on different pages in P&M, and you want to get back to kind of where you started from, you can click that home button or icon, and that will bring you right back to the page that we're looking at. The word provider network management does the same thing. So if you click on that, it'll bring you back to your home page or dashboard as well. We have Medicaid Home. That will open up a new tab in your web browser to the Ohio Department of Medicaid website. So if you needed to get information from the ODM website quickly, you can do so by clicking on the Medicaid Home button. Under the word learning, if you click on that, that's where reference or helpful documents will be housed. So many of the training documents that we have available in our learning management system, Absorb, those will be housed in there as well. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to access Absorb. That's where you would have registered for this training course. It's also where the slides that we're presenting today, those are available in Absorb. Under the documents and resources section, along with desk reference guides and quick reference guides, and those guides will be added here to P&M under that learning section. Under contact, it'll bring up some different contact phone numbers if you need to, call or need assistance, including that help desk number that I put in the chat earlier, that will show up under contact. And then fee schedule will open up, if you need for reference, the fee schedules, they can be accessed in PDF, HTML, or CSV format right there by clicking on the fee schedule button. And then the last button kind of over here on the right-hand side is the log out button. It will log you out of the P&M system. I will make note that for security purposes, P&M is set up to time out after 60 minutes of inactivity, 60 minutes of inactivity. So if you have P&M up, but you're not doing anything in P&M, you'll get a message around that 60 minutes that just asks if you're still there. And you can say yes if you are, but if you are inactive and that message comes up and nothing happens, then P&M will automatically log you out for security purposes after that 60-minute time frame. Staying up here in kind of this toolbar or ribbon across the top, I want to point out on the top left corner, this menu option with these 3 horizontal bars or horizontal lines. You can access the menu. And what's under the menu are a number of different options. It's also used kind of as a springboard or jumping off point to access different functions in the P&M system. So do want to kind of go through those different options that appear under the menu. So from what we just looked at on the previous screen where I clicked on those 3 horizontal bars or horizontal lines, that was right here where the word menu was or is. Now it's turned into an X because if I click this X, it'll close out the menu. So just to give you a reference, it's going to pop open that menu to the left-hand side of the screen. After I would click those 3 horizontal lines, it'll pop out that menu to the left-hand side. Do want to walk through kind of each of these options so you have a good understanding of what is under the menu as we work down this list. So we have skip to main content. That's just going to return you to your homepage or dashboard if you click on that. Medicaid Home will open up that Ohio Department of Medicaid website in your browser if you need to access that quickly. The word home will bring you back to your homepage or dashboard. These two I'm going to focus on a little bit more detail on the next few slides, but we have the provider directory and the provider search GIS. And what these are public facing provider directories and searches so that, and what I mean by public facing is that a user does not have to log into P&M to access these. They could just open up, go to the P&M URL or website, and then these options would appear for them for provider directory and provider search, and they'd be able to search for a Medicaid enrolled provider by certain criteria or bring up on an interactive map the information about the providers or specific provider types as well. We'll talk more about that in depth, but just wanted to call those two out since they are public facing. You don't have to access P&M to access kind of those two functions. Payment innovation reports, if you use those today or access those through the Haven portal, that's the same place that you'll access them after P&M does launch on October 1st, and that can be accessed through this link as well in the menu. Provider ed and training resources, that's provider education and training resources. It's going to take you to the exact same place as that learning ribbon or learning button did on the top of that blue ribbon or toolbar. So where we're housing training materials, desk reference guides, quick reference guides, those can be accessed through the menu here as well by clicking on provider ed and training resources. And then the last two, we have contact us. As I said, brings up those contact phone numbers for assistance. And then lastly, we have log out, which will log you out of the P&M system and bring you back to that login page. So those are the different options that we have within the menu. But I said I was going to take a little bit more in-depth look on these two, provider directory and provider search GIS, and that's what we're looking at here. So here's the screenshot of what the directory looks like. Public-facing provider directory, so anybody can access this. They don't have to log into P&M, and they can search for a Medicaid enrolled provider under kind of these different quadrants of information. We've got provider information and health plan, patient details, location, additional provider details. They can search by any or all of these different criteria. So an example could be, maybe I'm looking for a provider in my city. I can put in my zip code and say it's within 10 miles of my zip code and hit search and see what results come up. So again, you can use any or all this criteria to look up information for Medicaid enrolled providers. Once I have my criteria, I'll hit the search button and search results appear here at the bottom of the page. Just right underneath where I click search, that's where those results would appear. And I can see kind of basic information about the provider, the name, if they work at a facility, what the facility name is, the provider type, their specialty and address, and so forth. Also, there's additional information that's contained under the provider name. Anytime in P&M, if you see kind of words with an underline underneath them, that means it's a clickable link, or it is something that's clickable. So if I would click on the provider's name here, it would pop up more information about that provider, and a lot of it related to these details over here. So it would talk about the different patient types that they may accept, or if they speak Spanish or another language at that location, or their hours of operation. All of that information can be accessed by clicking on the provider name here, and that will pop up. The directory and the provider search will work the same. We're going to look at provider search next, but they work in the same way that if I want to restart my search, I can just hit the clear button, and it'll clear out the previous information and allow me to begin a new search. I do also want to make mention that if you, as a provider, or if you're an administrator on behalf of a provider, if you do not want to be included in this public-facing provider directory or the provider search we're about to look at, you do have the ability to opt out. There is a button or a checkbox within P&M that says to opt out. We won't look at that today, or in this session, I should say, but in our new enrollment updates and revalidation session, I will show you where that button's located. So if you don't want to be included in the directory, you do not have to be. There is a way to opt out of that. This is the provider directory. Here's the provider search. A little bit different. You don't have as much criteria to search for as you do on the directory. Really, the only thing that you can select from this dropdown is the provider type. So you click on the drop-down menu to choose an available provider type, and it's a wealthy list. We can see this scroll bar can go down all the way to the bottom of the page, but we want to choose a provider type and then click the search button. So in this example, let's say I chose audiologist individual, and then I clicked on search. It's going to bring up results of all the providers that fit that provider type that are enrolled in Ohio Medicaid and have not opted out of the directory or search. And then we can use these navigational buttons within this interactive map to move around. So you can certainly use those buttons, or if you click and drag on your mouse and zoom in and zoom out with the scroll bar, you can do that as well to navigate through our interactive map. But all of these kind of indicators are the providers who meet this criteria for provider type. And if I want to get some more information, I can just hover over one of these indicators, and then it'll provide me with just some basic information in regards to a name and address for that specific provider. As I said, though, we can also zoom in. So we've got kind of this cluster here in Columbus. I can zoom in and maybe see which is the closest to my house, or things like that if I'm looking for that specific provider. So that's how we can make use of that provider search, and really the directory and the search work hand in hand, in the sense that if we do opt out of one, we are opting out of both in that case. Also talked about the contact us. If you clicked on contact us from the menu, it would bring up contact phone numbers, including that ODM integrated help desk, which I mentioned is this top number here, the 1-800-686-1516. But there are other numbers in here as well. So as you're using P&M or have questions or need assistance, you've got the contact phone numbers right there at your fingertips within P&M by clicking on the contact button. So that's kind of an overview of the menu. Like I said, several different options, but just wanted to kind of bring focus on a few of them located under that menu. So we've looked at this ribbon across the top, this kind of blue bar, blue toolbar, and focused on there. Now I want to focus our attention on our homepage or dashboard on these kind of dark purple buttons with the white text kind of sort of in the middle part here. And that's what we're going to focus on and work our way left to right across. So starting from the left, the My Providers button, that's the first button that appears. And by clicking on this button, it's just going to refresh the information that we're seeing on the page. So we are seeing the providers that are linked to us. Right now, we're looking at an administrator view. And the way that we know that is we've got some of these other buttons we'll talk about, but agents wouldn't see some of these. So we know we're looking at the administrator view, and then all the providers that we're the administrator for will appear in this table right here. And this My Providers just refreshes that list. The next button is Select Provider. Now what this does, it allows you to search for and move providers to your Ohio ID account based on identifying information, such as tax ID, NPI, and Medicaid ID. Now, if this sounds familiar, This is basically the same process that you would complete in the pre-registration process, but this is just how it's done in PNM. So if existing provider information was not linked to an Ohio ID prior to the launch of PNM in October, and the pre-registration wasn't complete, this is how you could do it when you come into PNM for the first time after October 1st to be able to kind of link that up. So really taking that same pre-registration process, but this is how it's completed once the PNM system does launch. So if I clicked on select provider, it would bring up, we can see it's kind of grayed out. It'll bring up additional information, and I need to put in my Medicaid ID, NPI, and tax ID information for the provider that I'm trying to link to my account as the administrator. And we can see I've done that here in this bottom screenshot. Put in my Medicaid ID, my NPI, and my tax ID. And once I've entered that identifying information for that provider, I can go ahead and click save. So let's say for an example that, I came into PNM and it says, no providers available because I did not complete the pre-registration process, and there's no link between the providers I'm the administrator for and my Ohio ID account that I just created. That's what I'm going through and doing in this process. So if I didn't have any providers and I completed this process, now I do have a provider showing up here in my list. And I can continue to repeat that process if I need to have multiple providers show up under my administrator account. Now, if for whatever reason that the details don't appear right away, the provider doesn't appear in the list right away, you can either click the home icon at the top, or as we said, my providers will do the same thing. Clicking either of those will refresh the page, so it may take a moment for kind of that linkage to go through, and then you can hit refresh, and that newly added provider should show up in your homepage or your dashboard there. Continuing with our buttons here across the middle section, pending agent request is the next button. And this button allows you as the administrator to approve agent requests or requests from other users to be able to access a provider's information. This is all based on a specific Medicaid ID and those identifying things that we saw on the last screen for select providers. But this is where the administrator can say, approve, yes, the agent should have access to this information, and I'm going to make sure that they do. So that's all pending agent request is. So if a administrator receives a pending agent request, they will be kind of notified. This button should look slightly different when there are pending requests, and you can click on that button, pending agent requests, and this is what it looks like. I know for training purposes, it's not really able to tell, it just says agent 1 and agent 2, but in actuality, the first and last name of the agent who's requested access to the provider should appear here. So that way the administrator knows, who the person is. They're not just trying to decipher a username or anything like that. So the nice thing that PNM has done is if you've got multiple agents that you're wanting to approve, rather than having to go through each one individually, there's kind of a select all option up here at the top that you can select all the agents that appear, and then make sure to hit save, and then that process will be completed. And all that we're doing here is just saying that this agent should have access to this provider's information. Now, we do have to go one step further as an administrator if we actually want the agent to complete things, submit claims, or complete the revalidation on behalf of a provider. There's another step we need to complete as a administrator in order for that to be able to happen. And that's the next button that we're going to see on our list here, account administration. This is where we can set up and manage accesses of other users, which are known as agents. We can get that all set up here under the account administration button. And also, if we needed to transfer from one administrator to another, maybe somebody's leaving our office, maybe somebody's going on extended vacation, and somebody else needs to be the administrator, that transfer can also happen here under the account administration button. So let's dive in. Let's first look at getting our other users or agents set up in PNM and what that process looks like. So we're going to click on account administration. And this is the screen that pops up after we do that for account administration. So we just need to make a choice of who we want to change accesses to, or kind of which provider's account are we granting those accesses to? And the way we do that is by selecting from this dropdown a Medicaid ID number. Now, the only Medicaid ID numbers that appear in this dropdown are the ones linked to you as the administrator. So if I only have one Medicaid ID number that I'm the administrator for, that's the only number that will appear in this dropdown. So the administrator is the one who kind of sets up these agent accesses. It's based on the Medicaid ID number, and that's why only the Medicaid IDs associated with the administrator would show up here. So I'm going to select from my drop-down menu a Medicaid ID, and I've done that. The nice thing that PNM does is, as we look at Medicaid IDs, as much as we, may feel like we know them or maybe have them memorized, it's not going to rely on us to do that. So once I selected this Medicaid ID from the drop-down menu, the name line automatically filled in with the name that's associated to this Medicaid ID. So don't have to memorize all the numbers. The name will show up and I can confirm, yep, this is the provider in which I want to add an agent for and give those accesses. Another thing I'll point out is kind of the screen we're looking at here where it says no users to activate or deactivate or no matching records found, or even at the top, it's got this red text that says no agents are mapped to the Medicaid ID. This is a screen that you'll only really see the very first time that you're associating agents to a provider record, just because no one is in here beforehand. Now, once you set up an agent, you won't get these messages or this red text at the top because there are existing providers that are already set up. So let's set up an agent for the very first time. The way that we're going to do that is down here at the bottom, we're going to click on the button that says add user, because we want to add a brand new user, an additional user to be able to access the provider information or have access to the provider's record. So I'm going to click on add user, and then I need to provide some information for that particular user, for that particular person that's going to serve as the agent role. I'll need their user ID, which is their Ohio ID user account. And so I just want to stress that again, because we're using Ohio ID to access the PNM system, I'll need the Ohio ID for the user who I'm trying to set up. And then we go one step further with the information that's needed. In addition to the Ohio ID user account, we need the email address associated to that Ohio ID account. The reason for that is, some Ohio IDs could be similar, and just to make sure you don't key in, an incorrect letter, an incorrect number, and assign it to the wrong person or somebody who should not have access to that provider's information. We're going to ask you kind of twofold here for information. So user ID and email address, and we're going to put that information in. So my user ID in this scenario is training agent 1. I put in the email address associated with that user ID, and then I can go ahead and click the save button. Once I click save, I'll be taken to this screen. So this is the exact same screen that we saw previously. Remember before I called out, it said, no users to activate or deactivate or no information or anything. Well, now we have information. We have a user, an agent set up, and we're ready to assign them specific tasks or actions to complete within the PNM system. So training agent 1 was my user ID for that agent. And then below that section here, I can see for training agent 1 and all these kind of different check boxes. These are the boxes that relate to these roles over here on the left-hand side of the page. So as I want to assign actions or assign tasks to a specific user or this specific, user ID, this training agent 1, I need to check these different boxes in order to do that. And it could just be checking one box or checking multiple boxes, whatever tasks or processes I want them to be able to complete, that's what I need to check. So let's say I go through and I'm going to check, these 3. I'm going to let this agent view provider reports, retrieve reports, access provider correspondence. I'm giving them all of these actions. Once I'm satisfied with the actions that I have given, I can go down here to the bottom of the page and click save, and that information will update. We've added that user as an agent, and we've also assigned them specific tasks or roles or actions to complete on behalf of this Medicaid ID, not on the behalf of everyone that's under my umbrella or every provider that I'm an administrator for, only for this specific Medicaid ID that shows up here at the top. Now, I do have the ability to switch between Medicaid IDs and things like that, but I just wanted to point out it's not kind of all encompassing. It's just per the Medicaid ID that I do have listed up here at the top of the screen. So I mentioned these different actions or roles or tasks that appear down the left-hand side here, and I know it's kind of hard to see. So I have gone ahead on these next two slides to kind of break down what all of these actions are. And that's what we'll see here. It's kind of broken down in two parts because there's so many actions or tasks that can be assigned to different agents. And so here's really part one. So the role or name that's in the left-hand column, that's what we would see in that column next to the check boxes. And then, at least for the purposes of this table on the right-hand side, it's going to give us that description of what each one is and what it does if I assign it to that particular user or agent. Do want to make a call out for one right here, kind of in the middle of the page, this enrollment agent role or action. This was newly added within the last month based on feedback from the provider community. We received feedbacks in training sessions just like this one that we really needed an expanded agent role when it relates to enrollment, because prior to the addition of this, only administrators could do new enrollment applications, updates, and revalidations for a specific NPI or Medicaid ID. Now, an agent role can complete the updates, so like change of addresses, things like that, and also go through the revalidation process for the provider. The new enrollment side of it, new application enrollment for a newly enrolling provider, is still with the administrator, but they have added those agent functionalities. So as long as the agent is given that enrollment agent role or task or ability on those checkboxes we just looked at, they would be able to complete updates or go through the revalidation process on behalf of the provider. So just wanted to call that out as we look at part two of the different roles or actions or tasks that are assigned to agents. Here on part two, a lot of these are focused on access to specific reports, and you can kind of see that in those descriptions listed. But this table is also available on our frequently asked questions or FAQ document, as well as a quick reference guide that we have set up in how to assign agents roles and everything like that. All of these roles or actions are contained in that document as well. And both of those you can find in Absorb in our learning management system. And we'll take a look at that if we've got time here at the end of the session where all of that's housed. Want to show you another example here of agents. So here we have a different provider that we have set up, but we can see we've got their Medicaid ID and their name up here at the top, and then we've got multiple agents. So when we saw that visual earlier, we can have multiple agents that are for a specific NPI or Medicaid ID, and we would see all of those agents kind of displayed on this screen. We've got agent 1 and agent 2. We can give them all the same accesses if we wanted to click the same checkboxes for each of them, or we can differ what accesses we grant to them by selecting different checkboxes. Also from this screen, if we no longer wanted agent 1 to have access to this provider record, we can remove their access, and that's what this deactivate button is up here at the top. If I no longer wanted agent 1 to be able to see James Abbott's information in P&M, I can hit deactivate, and they'll no longer see that provider in their queue. I could just uncheck everything, but they'll still see the provider information and have access to the record. They just won't be able to complete these tasks. But if I completely want to eliminate, maybe that person's left or something like that, I can just hit deactivate, and now agent 1 will no longer see James Abbott's information for that provider. So just wanted to give you an idea of what it looks like here if we have multiple agents set up for a specific Medicaid ID. We're going to stay on the same account administration screen, but we're going to look at it for a different purpose. A situation may arise where you need to change administrators. Maybe the person who's serving as the administrator is going to be on an extended vacation, or is leaving a company or something like that, and somebody else needs to become the administrator. That can be done beforehand, before that administrator leaves. They can complete that process. Now, if it doesn't happen in that time frame, you may have to contact that integrated help desk number that I put in the chat, and they'd be able to change administrators. But if we proactively know that an administrator needs to be changed, the current administrator can reassign this Medicaid ID to a different administrator or a different user. And the way that we do that is from this same account administration page. We've got our Medicaid ID chosen at the top, and we can see our provider's name is James Abbott. And instead of going down to the bottom where we added the user and all of that before, we're just going to be focused on this change admin to box. Very simple process. I just need to put in the user ID, which is the Ohio ID for the new administrator, whoever I want to change the administrator access to. That's the administrator I want to list here under the change admin to, put in their username, and then click the change admin button. And that's it. It'll be changed over to that person. But as I said in training, we do like to call out possibilities of error messages. So let's say I put in a name there and hit change admin. These could be some error messages that do pop up in that process. So this first one says user ID entered should be an Ohio ID account. So maybe I keyed in the wrong thing and it's not recognizing it as an Ohio ID account. Or another option that may come across is the user ID entered does not exist. The system can't find this person anywhere, either through Ohio ID or in P&M or anything. So may just want to coordinate with the person that we're trying to change the administrator to, just to make sure we've got their right information and right details as well. But once we do hit that change admin button, that provider's record, that Medicaid ID, NPI, that will no longer show in my homepage or dashboard, and now it will show up in the dashboard of the new administrator. So that happens, pretty quickly in the process of pretty much hitting change admin. It should happen instantaneously, or I may have to refresh the page for that just to take effect, but it happens pretty quickly. So that's how we change the administrator. We've talked about an agent. Just want to show you kind of what the homepage or dashboard looks like from an agent point of view. And that's what we're looking at here on the screen. Very similar to the process or the visual that we see from the administrator side. Really, the only difference is in terms of the amount of buttons. We can see we don't have that pending agent request button or account administration button, or even that new provider button that's listed on the administrator. So that's how we know we're looking at an agent, because they can't approve their own request. They don't have access to account administration, and they can't initiate new enrollment applications, which is why they don't have those buttons available here. The buttons that are available here for an agent work very similar to the administrator. They've got the My Providers button, which again is just kind of refresh the list of providers on the screen. And these providers that the agent is seeing are ones that have been assigned to them. So the administrator has either approved their request, or the administrator has assigned this agent these specific providers. And that's why this agent is seeing both James Abbott and Test Training in their homepage or dashboard, because they have been specifically assigned these providers. The other button is the Select Provider button, and this allows an agent to request that access to a provider record. So it works very similar that it does on the administrator side, but rather than it automatically appearing in the homepage or dashboard for the agent, that's where those requests come into play. They're going to request access to a specific provider, and then the administrator would be able to grant those accesses through those pending agent requests. Do see in the Q&A panel, got a question. For Ohio Medicaid waiver enrollment application, I will submit on behalf of the provider after a change of ownership occurs. But once that process is complete and then they are certified, I no longer have any responsibility for that information. Will I still be able to submit a new enrollment on behalf of the provider? I believe I understand your question correctly, and yes. So you start the process, you'll submit the application after a change of ownership. And then once that process is complete, they're certified, you no longer have any responsibility for it. So if you wanted to transfer that administrative right to somebody else to kind of keep up with any updates or anything like that, you certainly could do that and be able to have a new enrollment for another provider. Not, you wouldn't do a new enrollment for that existing Medicaid ID because there wouldn't be a need for it. But as long as you're the administrator, you certainly could go through that process, or you could transfer that administrator to somebody else if you're never going to have to go through that process again. So I hope I understood that correctly and answered that in such a way. But you certainly can do that. You can initiate the new process, and then once it's finalized and everything, you could still remain as the administrator and have other people be agents, or you could transfer that kind of administrator rights to somebody else. Mentioned the agent, so select provider from the agent side. Again, initiates that agent request. It looks exactly the same as it does from the administrator side. I just need the Medicaid ID, NPI, and tax ID for a particular provider that I want access to. Once I enter that information in, I can hit the save button. Now, the only difference is when we did that from the administrator side, it automatically came into my queue in my dashboard, and I was good to go. But from the agent side, it'll just send that request to whoever is the administrator for that particular Medicaid ID number. They'll receive a request that this agent user wants access to that provider information. And so hopefully that should all go through. If it doesn't, you may get an error message that looks like this, saying the provider is not associated with any provider administrator with an Ohio ID. So this could be a situation once the system does go live in October, that I am an agent and I'm trying to request access to a provider. Basically, the system is telling me that this provider that I'm requesting access to does not have an administrator. So I would just want to follow up with whoever I believe should be the administrator and make sure that they have set everything up correctly. So again, you may never ever see this error message, but just in case you do, that's all it's telling you, is that this provider, this Medicaid ID number, is not set up with anybody as an administrator, and therefore, your access cannot be approved because no one's the administrator for that. So it's kind of a helpful message to understand that there may still be a disconnect in that process. As an agent, once I'm given tasks or actions that we talked about, or roles to complete, the way that I'm going to initiate those is by clicking on either of these hyperlinks. As we said, words with an underline under them in P&M are hyperlinks. So I can click on either of these under the registration ID, which is a new just kind of identifier that's used by the P&M system, or the provider name. Either of these links will take me to the same place, which is the provider management homepage. So I'm going to click on this link. And then I'm taken to the provider management homepage. We can see that up here at the top. So I can go under this self-service section. There's a little plus icon, and I can expand our self-service selections. Now, these are the ones that have been specifically assigned to me by the administrator. So the administrator has allowed me, the agent, to be able to, for this provider, for this particular Medicaid ID number, I can review the provider's correspondence. I can search for eligibility. I can also submit claims and prior authorizations as well. This attachments isn't a separate, it's related to claims and prior auth. So if either of these are selected, it's just in regards to attaching documents for claims or prior authorization submission. So not an extra thing that has to be added to our agent's account, but if we add claims or prior auth, it's added. Just wanted to call that out. Also mentioned that enrollment agent role. So if that has been added to an agent, there would be enrollment action. So we could expand that selection up here with the plus icon and see the ability to either complete updates for the provider, or if we're within the revalidation window, which is 120 days, the option to begin revalidation would show up in there as well. But just wanted to reiterate that the agent will only see whatever actions are given to them on that checklist by the administrator. So if I was only given provider correspondence, that's all I would see in here. I wouldn't see all the rest of these options as well. And then to initiate the process, just need to click the hyperlink, or the words with the underline. It's clickable, it's a hyperlink, it'll take me somewhere else to kind of initiate those processes. Now, I will point out too that within this section, again, some of these may not show up, and it all is dependent upon what the administrator gives. And then lastly, let's point out our last button up here on the top right corner. That says new provider, and it says it with a question mark. So it's, new provider. But this button is used to start a new enrollment application for any new Ohio Medicaid provider. So if you're, enrolling yourself, I know right now in MITS that's kind of shut down. They disabled the ability to enroll in Medicaid, and that has to be done in P&M after October 1st. This is where you would come to initiate that process, is under new provider. Same thing if you're putting in a new application for Ohio Medicaid, this is where you would complete that. We do cover that process in our other training session, or our other module, new enrollment updates and revalidation. We do have one of those sessions today at 3 o'clock, and then some more of those coming up on Thursday. And I'll actually go through our schedule in just a second, just in case you have not yet signed up for one of those sessions. But those are kind of the homepage, the dashboard, the overall navigation. Do want to pause and see what questions you may have about anything that we have covered today, or anything in regards to specifically the homepage or navigation throughout P&M. And I don't see any in the chat. So I do just want to go over that schedule, as I mentioned. So today we do have a new enrollment updates and revalidation session starting here at the top of the hour, kind of going through those different processes. And then we also have sessions on Thursday. That is a date change. Originally, those were scheduled for tomorrow, the 7th, but now they're on Thursday, the 8th. new enrollment updates and revalidation 9 to 11, and also a session from 1 to 3. And then Friday afternoon, we do have an Ask Me Anything session set up. It's really just kind of an open forum to ask questions. You may have already participated in some that we've had already, but you can find the links for all these sessions. They are virtual links, just like the one we're in now. All of these are contained in Absorb, which is our learning management system, and where you can find all this information. And so with that, I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. I do just want to thank you so much for your attendance in our session today. And we do welcome your feedback. We do value your feedback, whether it's, positives or things that we can work on for training. We do want to take that feedback. And you can access the evaluation in Absorb, again, that learning management system, which also has our training materials and guides. I'm going to show you what Absorb looks like, just in case you haven't been there very often, and what that kind of looks like in that process. But also do want to point out that if you do have additional questions upon the conclusion of our session today, you can reach out to us. Our email is ohiotrainingteam@maximus.com. Our entire training team reviews that inbox, so we'll be able to take a look at any emails that come in there. But let me switch screens here real quick. I'm going to pull open Absorb, our learning management system. And let's see if I can make sure I get the right window open. Here we go. So here's our learning management system in Absorb, and hopefully this looks familiar to you, as this is where you came to register for this course. So I'm going to log in with my username, which is my email address, and a password. And I'm going to click log in. And your homepage or dashboard may look different. You may only have one course. I'm signed up for multiple. This is just a training account. But for the purposes of today, we want to make sure we know where ODA, waiver provider training is. So that's the one I want to click resume on, because that's what we're in today. Here's our course catalog or course content, where you can access a number of different pieces of information. So if I scroll down, I can see all the different sessions that we have available, some e-learning modules as well, other sessions. Here's the information for the Ask Me Anything session on Friday. If you need to grab that link, you can access it there. But I do want to show this section here at the bottom, documents and resources. It's the very last section under the course content. So if I click start on documents and resources, it's going to pull up all of these helpful documents for training. So this course companion, these are the slides that we viewed in today's session. They're available for you there. We'll be posting recordings of our sessions this week in here throughout the week, so you can access those too. Frequently asked questions. We've got our desk reference guides, quick reference guides. All of those can be accessed here just by clicking the start button under the documents and resources section here in Absorb. But I did want to point out, in the time that we have left, the evaluation. So you should be able to locate the session that we're in, which is the sign-on and setup of agents and administration. So if you click on view, and I know this might not be the exact session we're in, but it works the same way. Right after you hit view, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see evaluate course. So you can click on evaluate course, and there's 5 or 6 questions here. You can just provide your feedback to us. Like I said, we do value your feedback from the evaluation so that we can improve as a training team. So that's just in Absorb. Access the course from today, sign on and setup, and the evaluate course option is located right there on the right side. So do want to come back to our PowerPoint just to see if there's any last minute questions. And if you do have any, you can put them in the Q&A panel or raise your hand as well. And if you, again, think of anything after our session has ended, you can reach out to us at ohiotrainingteam@maximus.com. Well, I want to thank you all for joining today, and hopefully you found this session helpful in regards to the sign-on and setup of agents and administrators in P&M. As we said, we have some additional sessions coming up this week, and I look forward to seeing you in those sessions as well. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate your feedback, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.